My name is Ross Mintemeyer. I'm the director of the Center for Geospatial Analytics, and I'm thrilled to have Dr. Ben Watson with us here today to kick everything off. Ben is associate professor in computer science right here at NC State, and he's director of the Visual Experience Lab, where his group studies how visual technologies affect human emotion, thinking, and behavior. And from my experience working and talking with Ben, he's always excited about geospatial technologies and thinking spatially. And he was on the search committee that hired me. I have to love him. I hired Aaron and Raju.
Wise man, yes.
Anyways, well, it's really great you're here, Ben. Take it away. Thanks.
Thanks, Ross. Yep, so today I'm going to talk about a user experience researcher's perspective on spatial things. And by and large, I am going to take the big view. I'm not going to talk about any particular research. I'm just going to raise a lot of questions and hopefully create some discussion. So let's begin. We'll start with a review of wayfinding problems. So the basic problems that people have in moving around the world, and how our ways of solving those problems have changed over the years, over the decades or centuries even. And then we'll talk about what I believe are trends. If I sort of stand back and squint, how is all of this playing out these days? And do we like what we see? Is the questions I'll be asking. And then I'll sum up at the end. So the most basic question, if you're trying to find your way around the world, is figuring out where you are. Because if you're trying to go someplace, it's a pretty good idea to know where you're starting from. And so from the very beginning of humankind, the way we would do this, one way we would do this, one helpful thing is to know where the sun is. If we know where the sun is, then we know, which way is north, east, and west, roughly speaking. We also can look to the stars, and over the millennia, we people have created all manner of stories to help us remember how the stars are arranged, so that when the sun is gone, we can still find our way around. And then there are some amazing, I don't know how many of you have read any of these stories, some amazing Polynesian navigators. So the Polynesians have a very hard problem to solve, which is how do you go from one little tiny speck of land in the middle of the Pacific to another little tiny speck of land without a GPS, without a compass. And they figured it out. It has to do, I'm not an expert at this, but it has to do with understanding the way the currents flow and observing them from a boat, and then also a lot to do with understanding how the air works in those seas. By and large, as you might expect today, most of that knowledge and expertise is gone. It was passed down verbally, and it's not really necessary anymore. So there's an example of some extreme wayfinding skill that has been lost. Then we began developing tools. One of the earlier tools was a compass, again, to help us figure out which way we're facing. Another one is the sextant, more recent, figuring out how far north and south we are on the globe. There's a really interesting story to read, if you haven't, about trying to figure out how far east and west we are, or where we are in terms of east and west on the globe. Much more challenging, with huge prizes from the British Empire for solutions. So I encourage you to read it. Even more recently, we began figuring out radio and realized that we could use radio beacons to locate ourselves on the planet if we had several of these around us. And these began appearing about 100 years ago. I don't know if any of you paid attention to the recent anniversary of the famous naval battle of Jutland in the First World War. It was a huge battle, and at that time, they already had, for the Navy, some of these beacons available, but they didn't trust them, and so the Navy suffered much heavier losses, the British Navy did, than they would have otherwise. Then there are also other ways that we locate ourselves, much more everyday ways, more human-scale ways, where we just note outstanding things around us, landmarks, and that helps us locate ourselves in our fairly well-known environment. So here's a very unique building, the Dorton Arena. Anybody recognize this?
On Hillsborough.
Yeah, on Hillsborough, yes. This is now been declared historic. There was a lot of discussion in the city council about it because Lulu, I think I'm getting the name right, the electronic publisher was leaving this building, and so the developer wanted to know what they could do with the sign, and the city got involved. This used to be one marker that you'd arrived in Raleigh. Let's see if anybody knows what this is. Anybody know? Anybody know about this?
I've seen that picture before.
Yeah.
Number 6. My chiropractor.
Yeah. So this is gone. This is a lost landmark. It's Mr. Peanut. So Mr. Peanut was invented in North Carolina for Planters Peanuts. And you used to, when you drove into town, be able to see Mr. Peanut on your way in. So that was another sign that you were almost to Raleigh.
Where was it?
Sorry?
Where was it located?
You know, I'm not sure exactly. I think it was on the north side of town, but it's gone now.
Capitol Boulevard.
Yeah. Oh, you remember it?
I wasn't in the 60s.
Yeah.
I think that Presbyterian church might still be there.
Oh, you see a church back. Oh, yeah, there it is.
We're Lutheran.
Yeah.
Oh, it might be St. Philip.
Right. So these are all landmarks that we use in our more everyday lives to figure out where we are locally. And this is the way we still do it to some degree, but today we have stuff like this. We have a gadget in our pocket, and it shows us a map, and it locates us exactly within a few meters on that map with a blue dot. So all of this locating yourself stuff used to be so much work and so hard to do, and now it's basically a solved problem, right? So big change. Next problem is figuring out where you want to go, right? Not necessarily how you get there yet, but where should I go? Where can I get what I need or what I want? So the way you used to figure this out is by talking to your buddies, right? People in the town with you, people in your family, and everybody would share knowledge about where you could get what you needed. And we still do that in many ways. Anybody recognize this? Does it bring back any memories? Yeah. That's right. The yellow pages, right? So most of us don't even, and I'm sure a lot of us don't know what this is. I don't get them anymore. But this was one way, very good way of figuring out where to go, right? Because let's say you needed I don't know, painter. You would look up P in the yellow pages. And there was an address there, and you could call them, right? And just to show you, again, how spatial this is, let's listen to this. I don't know what the deal is with that.
Save your money. Use the easy way to find out who's got what at the best price. Let your fingers do the walking. Let your fingers do the walking.
Remember those? Right? So this was the way that you would figure out where to go. It was all about travel, right? now this is how we do it. We whip out our phone, our trusty phone. Google Maps has some sort of index behind it and even has ratings. There are other apps like Yelp that work sometimes. And you just type in a search phrase and off you go. Anybody ever get frustrated with this new approach to finding your place to go? What are your frustrations?
Sometimes the reception.
The reception, yeah. My frustration is often that I don't know exactly what keyword to put in, right? Like this is not a browsing interface. This is some kind of text-based interface. And I don't know who these people are who are, providing ratings. So, okay, next problem. Now we have to figure out how to get there. We know where we are. We know where we want to go. How do we get there? So here's the old school way. Let's see. Oop, wrong mouse. You just go up and you ask the nice Bobby. And how many of you have asked directions, person to person asked directions in the last few weeks? Yeah, like 2 or 3 of us. Isn't that weird? So that's the way we used to do it, and sometimes we still do that. Here's another way that we tell each other how to get to someplace. We draw special maps. These are not maps like Google makes. They're sort of similar, but they're simpler. They highlight what's important, only what's relevant. They have lots of landmarks on them. This is a pretty good one, actually.
Usually not to scale.
Yeah, right. Somebody was very careful not to put in north and not to scale. Okay. So today, we have all these gadgets that tell us about traffic. This is how it used to work.
We're about ready to hear from the all-seeing eye high in the sky. A reminder that this is it here on the Niagara Frontier, Singing Along Radio, the most talked about sound around. And around and about is Jack Sharp in WEDR Traffic Copter. Jack?
Coming in over Almond Avenue, this is Jack of the Creek Expressway.
So I remember this from when I was a kid. Do they still have helicopters flying around that tell us what the traffic is? Does anybody actually listen? No? Okay. Usually, because by the time they tell it to us, it's, history. So, and also it's just one view on a very big space. But anyway, that's the way we used to do it. People relied on this. Here's another way. How many of you have these in your car today? Yeah? Wow, this is an unusual crowd. Yeah, my students, they don't have these things. They don't understand about folding. It was never really nice anyway. And, it does, this technology doesn't tell you where you are, so. Anyway, this is the...
It's big.
Which is not good in the car, right? Yeah. So this is how we used to find our way around. Anybody recognize this? What is that?
AAA.
Triptych, a AAA triptych. Yeah. So these were specialized routes that they still make, actually. You can go if you want to, and you can go to the AAA office and get these. And they tell you, exactly just the information on the route to follow, useful stuff along the way, like campgrounds and places to eat, but nothing else. So it's simplified, especially for your route. Obviously, they only have so many, right? So they can't customize very much. But yeah, triptychs. And so here's how it works today, right? You put in a couple of addresses, and then it draws a line for you somehow. And it might give you a couple alternatives, right? Like you could go this way or that way. But that's it. So that's a big change. It knows where you are. It knows where you want to go. It plans the route. And even while you're driving, it will tell you how to go.
Nice Pizza Hut right about Park Street.
Oh, yeah? Okay. All right, the last problem I'm going to talk about is once you're there, if you're going to stay a while, you want to know all you can about that place. And I think this is probably the human problem that's most poorly supported today with our technology. So this is what somebody who you met was trying to tell you about this area. They might give you something like this, right? This is my version of here. Then here it's not about getting from place to place. They're just trying to tell you about the general lay of the land, right? And it's important to figure out what is near me here, what's convenient. When do I have to actually plan to go somewhere? When can I sort of just do it easily locally? Here's another one. So these are the sorts of signs that are usually at the end of the, at the exit of the subway. So you emerge from the subway or the metro, and you've sort of gone from this netherworld of tubes into a real place again. And you're completely disoriented, you don't know what's there. So then they'll have these little local maps telling you where you are and what's available nearby. Here's another one that we don't see very much anymore, tourist maps. So these are maps that are specialized for certain audiences, not always just tourists, that highlight what matters to that audience, right? And so that's another way that we used to figure out absorb what's important locally. Remember these things, right? Bookstores, first of all, and then tour books, second of all. We don't see them in nearly the volume we used to. They're harder to get. And then when you do get them, they get disappointingly out of date kind of rapidly. But that's one way, and it's kind of awkward, right? Like, one thing that you do if you move to a new place is you buy the tourist book for that place. It doesn't really make sense, but that's what you have to do. So these kind of publishers have, generally speaking, migrated to phones today. And so you can get regularly updated information, have it all in your device, whatever that may be. So this whole idea of arriving at a new place is something that I'm sort of fascinated with. If I may, I'll call it place beaming. So today in our modern society, thanks to technology, there are all manner of ways in which we're arriving at a brand new place that we've never been at before suddenly. And we do this over and over and over again. And it's something we didn't used to do in the past. So that's it for problems. Any thoughts on, I just wanted to sketch a lay of the land about how human wayfinding behavior has been changing. And now let's sort of generalize. So one trend that I think I see is that wayfinding is moving from a necessity to a form of entertainment. It's something we still have to do and work at a little, but less than we used to. And it's something that now we're beginning to do more and more because it's fun. And let's look at some examples. So, it used to be hard work. You often get frustrated and puzzled. It was expensive. How many of you ever got one of these specialized things in your car? And then if you wanted to update it, if you wanted the 2-year-old update, it would cost you like another $500. And then it would only be 2 years out of date instead of 4 years out of date, right? So it used to be an expensive thing. Today, it's all free, and it's constantly updated. And so Garmin and people like that are really struggling, at least in the consumer market, because of these cheap and complete solutions, basically free solutions. And now there's all these forms of wayfinding as play that are beginning to emerge. So how many of you have ever gone geocaching? Geocaching. And I guess this would be the perfect crowd to do that, right? But here people are just looking for stuff because they want to, because it's fun. They're choosing actively to go out and find something that's hard to find, as opposed to having to do that. Here's a game called Ingress. Anybody here ever played Ingress? No? Nobody's heard of it? So let's watch a little bit of the video.
What was the net effect of the Niantic project? We had crossed a threshold in which global security could be at risk. Decrypting the data was the mistake.
This is not psychosis or some cognitive break, but an actual takeover of the mind.
Much of the public sculpture found in our cities is based on design seeded in the human mind.
Certain places have an energy that not only attracts people, but attracts events.
The mission of 13 Magnus is to monitor the effects of mind hacking. Obviously, this will be done with the highest of security, to make sure that the ideas do not contaminate or threaten humanity.
This all leads to Niantic.
I know that many tools will be needed to fight this battle.
You just have to know where to look and know what you're seeing.
Portals emit exotic matter into our world, and that matter has certain effects on our world.
I started noticing that there were energy fields, anomalies on Earth all around me.
Okay. Does this sound familiar to anybody? So this game, Ingress, was built by the same people who built Pokemon Go a couple years ago. Ingress is much less well known because it doesn't have Pokemon on the title. The Ingress game, even so, has probably got 2 million or so active players wandering around. They're organized into 2 teams. Essentially, I think one team are alien invaders and the others are the resistance. And the way that you sort of grab territory is by having lots of the people, fellow players on your team, go to the certain locations and do certain things. And so that's a game in the real world, but it's mediated through the telephone, through your mobile device. It doesn't look this cool, though. And then Pokemon Go. How many of you guys played Pokemon Go? Yes? Not many. I'm shocked. Yeah, so, one of the selling points of Pokemon Go is that it's kind of an augmented reality thing. If this is augmented reality, okay. But more importantly, it's spatially distributed. You have to walk around in the real world. So now, for a few weeks there, you were seeing all these young people and some older people walking around looking at their phones all the time, and there was sort of a mania. It seems to have blown over. But anyway, these are 3 forms of wayfinding things, wayfinding tasks that are meant to be entertaining and become quite popular. So, first of all, let me ask this question. How many of you agree with the idea that wayfinding is beginning to become less and less of a necessity and more of a form of entertainment? How many would agree with that? Yeah? Okay. What are we gaining in this process as wayfinding becomes less necessary and becomes more of a pleasure? Are we losing anything in the process?
Mystery.
Mystery? What do you mean by mystery?
Discovery.
Yeah, I think that's true. I've thought about that a little bit too. I mean, I think that probably if we're making up for it with entertainment, and I'm not sure we are, we're getting some discovery back. But yes?
When your batteries die, you're in trouble.
That's right. So I really think that's true, that on the one hand, it's not often that we're getting lost anymore, so that's cool, right? But when we get lost, it's really bad, right? Because we're not practiced at this like we used to be.
You're turning off the brain.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. Like, there's a certain amount of cognitive load that you have to absorb to understand a map and find your way, but you don't have to have that while you're getting navigation through your phones and
That's right.
And that might change us in the long run if you're evolving.
Yes, we are. And in fact, there are studies, and I can't cite the names right now, but if you do a little Google scholaring, you can find papers about how the physical brain change of British taxi drivers is different from the brains of other people because they're such good wayfinders, right? And so I could imagine that if all of a sudden most of us stop doing difficult wayfinding, then our brains will change. Yes?
We're throwing away our backup navigation systems.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we have some type of catastrophic failure of our infrastructure, we're not going to know how to get home.
That's right. Especially those who've never had to do it at all, right? It reminds me of digital broadcast television. So it looks great most of the time. But then, when it doesn't work, there's like nothing, right? Whereas in the old days, analog TV, it sort of had a nice gradual fail, right? I could still, for a long time, make out what was happening, or at least listen to what was happening. But not with digital TV. It's all or nothing. So it's very brittle. Wayfinding is becoming brittle.
I think you gain time, though, by a lot. Right?
Yeah.
I get from my home to my work much faster than if I took the most direct way that I could find on a map because I'm not sitting in traffic.
And that's a good thing?
I prefer not to sit in bumper-to-bumper traffic. That sounds like a net positive to me.
Yeah. Productivity with that when you're not driving it too.
Yeah.
That's
I
right.
read a lot more journal articles not sitting in traffic.
Yeah, yeah. That's what you're doing, yeah. Yes?
You're losing that human personal communication by asking questions and interacting with other individuals.
That's right. So I think that one thing that's going on, and I'm not going to dwell on it, I don't have time today, but one thing that this trend means is that it's like technology often is, it's pretty isolating. The fact that so much of wayfinding is automated means we don't really have to, for those reasons at least, relate to other people very much. We don't have to stop, say hello, say where am I, how do I get there.
Wasn't that lost a long time ago with the car? I mean, we didn't talk to people in the car, right? I mean...
Well, maybe things were trending that way. Yeah, I'm just saying that this is another example.
Nostalgia thing about like, oh, in the good old days we had maps and we were better at spatial thinking. But is that actually true? I mean, I just use my brain power less to find, things. I know I still have spatial awareness. I can get there's routes that I still have in my brain.
Right.
But it's those places where I've never been before. It's those places that the Yelp locations that I would have never visited before. I don't have to spend 4 hours trying to figure out where those places are.
So yeah, is it a good or a bad thing? I mean, there was a lot of panic about the introduction of, I don't know how many of you remember this, the calculator. Oh no, we won't be able to do long division anymore, right? I think that in that case, most of the alarm was unjustified. I think things might be a little different here because a lot of our brain is dedicated to solving this problem. Actually, for example, wayfinding skill continues to improve until you're almost a teenager, whereas you're pretty much done learning language well before then. So, the implications are larger, whatever they are, right? But wayfinding was a huge survival skill. It's not as important as it used to be, but that's why so much of our cognition is dedicated to it. Yes?
One last point about this is that the transportation network is designed for people to look up the main routes and then connecting the old way of thinking. But now the way that we are navigating feels a little bit out of touch with the existing transportation network because my GPS will put me through a route just because it's going to save me 20 minutes. I have to go into a bunch of side roads and that people look at me like, what are you doing here? And those roads were not being used before, but they are now being used because some system puts you a bunch of people on it. So I think the transportation system gets affected as well.
Yep, I agree with you. And I have, I'm going to not try to jump ahead, but I'll have a slide where we'll come back to that. All right, so where am I? Anyway, one question I wanted to raise is people are beginning to think of wayfinding and finding your way around as play. And you can already see it happening. And I wonder if anybody had any thoughts about how we might employ spatial play to our benefit, maybe, as a society. Any thoughts?
We've talked a little bit about maybe the isolation of technology, but I could see it building community in some ways as well.
That's right, and that's one thing that happened where there was a certain amount, we were talking about community, when I was out with my boys doing Pokemon Go, that was like having a puppy, you know. It was an instant way of meeting people. It broke all the boundaries. Yep.
Can we get people doing useful things while they're out doing spatial play, like picking up litter or something?
Well,
I'm just trying to respond to your
citizen science.
Yeah, maybe.
Science,
yeah. One thing I'm not the kind of experts at geospatial analytics that you are, but it seems to me that a lot of what we should be thinking about, that I hope we're all thinking about, is how do we help people modify their spatial behavior to address problems like sustainability, right, or climate change, or health, right? So if we understood what people found intriguing or compelling or engaging about moving, maybe we could, you know, and we better understood what motivates people to do stuff like that, maybe we could begin nudging spatial behavior in the right direction. All right. So another trend that is, I think, beginning to reverse, but we'll start here, is that I see is that wayfinding used to be very specialized, so very idiosyncratic, but the technology has basically been standardizing wayfinding. You know, we used to talk to people, everybody had a different idea of where to go. We used to have specialized navigational aids for certain audiences. All that's gone now. Now we just have, everybody has this, right? Everybody's looking at the same map, more or less, and we're all navigating from that common reference. So that's, I think, by and large, a pretty valid trend. I would say there's one exception, which I'll note, which is Google Now. Has anybody ever played with Google Now? No. So Google, in all the stuff that it knows about you, if you use an Android device or put a Google app on your iPhone, it will remind you when it's time to leave for your appointment, or on your before you have to go home. It will tell you, you know, it's going to take you like 25 minutes to get home right now, and it will just push that at you. You don't have to ask. So it knows stuff about you, and it's individualized in that way. But by and large, I think we are beginning to move. We are already in a time of very standardized wayfinding. So what about that? Is that a good or a bad thing that everybody is, or what have we lost or gained in that process?
It seems like the examples that you've given, we've mostly just digitized what was previously on paper, right? So we have like Lonely Planet, which is a tourist guide, and most people in the digital world are going to be using that tourist guide, whereas before, most people got the paper copy. So in a lot of ways, or you went and got your trip from AAA, if you remember, or you went to
I think that's
map. So in a lot of ways, it seems like the primary difference is the medium in which that information is passed on.
That's partially true, but I do think that, for example, if two people say at roughly the same time, I want to go from A to B, they're going to get the same route back, right? So everybody's converging on the same route, subject to the constraints of traffic, perhaps. Maybe there's a feedback loop in there somewhere.
So you'd say it's more about the travel, the uniqueness of the path traveled than the medium in which the information is given.
And I would say that by and large, most people are using the same index or small set of indices, right? So if I want to look up a great restaurant, I look it up on Google or Yelp. We're all using the same index, right?
Whereas before it was just the yellow pages.
The yellow pages, or we're asking our friends, or personal discovery, right? And so the behavior is converging, is my observation. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I wonder a lot if Google, internally at least, hands out different routes. We don't know a lot about how they form their routes. So do they do that on purpose so that they avoid the traffic jams? They could be creating traffic jams at their scale. Right? Yeah?
So have we seen, I mean, look at when they put the interstate system in, like the loss of things like Route 66.
Right.
Where we're losing some alternative opportunities.
Right.
Very educational and very...
Right. Right. So everybody's converging on roughly the same routes, and the byways, as opposed to the highways, are becoming lost and forgotten. Right. Is it useful for us all to have a common frame of reference in some ways? Like, we don't have to compare maps anymore. We used to, right? Everybody is using the same map. And yes?
What about, I read or heard that Uber in the next 10, 15 years is planning on eliminating drivers and having...
Yeah, we'll be talking about that in a second, but yes. That will change the experience too.
Amazon and Google are going to start owning like thousands of drivers and drivers dropping toothpaste.
Yeah, Google is a leader in the self-driving car thing. So.
And they're mobile, the planes.
Yeah, they're also into flying taxis. You want to read Sergey Brin's about Sergey Brin and his flying taxi stuff, but that's not nearly as far along. Is it better to have a lot of diversity in spatial behavior, or is it better to have homogeneity? Are we, when we do this, what are we doing to our society? Are we, if we're all going on the same ways and the same paths and encountering the same scenes, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Yes?
We lose experiential qualities actually because we are more engaged with the environment instead of just focusing on where we are going.
In which way is more engaged with what's around you, and which?
If it is uniform, we may lose certain qualitative experiences of the space.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can have different experiences.
Yeah. I don't know if there's such a thing, but when I was thinking about this sort of stuff, I thought about spatial empathy, right? So people all exist in space. People behave in space. They shape the space that is around them. And if we limit the space we see, then we're limiting the evidence of their behavior and limiting the kind of people we see. Maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe that's another way in which we're sorting ourselves that's not good, right? So what might we do if we wanted to? If we wanted to introduce specialization back into our wayfinding so that not everybody got the same answer about how to get from A to B. You know, maybe it knew something about you. Maybe it knows the kinds of ways you like to go or usually go. How would that be useful? Or, and if so, how might we do it? Anybody have thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I'm still struggling to digest why we are going to unification rather than specialization. Because I think as we go through the technology, we calculate all these uncertainties that we couldn't do before.
For example?
People used to walk across miles and kilometers to get somewhere in the desert or somewhere. And then most probably they didn't know if it's going to rain or it's going to be a catastrophe or anything. So they will probably go all in the same direction and experience different things. But now everything is calculated in a second. So if I want to go from here to New York, in less than 1 minute someone may receive a different simulation. So I'm just wondering if the technology is going to calculate all these uncertainties, we'll probably get very much different answers.
I think that we certainly could do it that way. I'm not sure that we are. I don't know if any of you all know the answer about how Google's pathfinding algorithms work.
So for instance, if you open the Google and if you have a path and there's like a tab that you open that gives you at least 7 or 8 different ways to get there. And you choose what you want. And
right.
People choose different based on the expenses.
Really? You ever choose the one that's longer?
Well, yeah, but you also have, so as you parameterize it, so you have the...
I mean, I'm not arguing that there is no choice. I'm just saying there are fewer choices made.
So you can calculate better. So all these, as you parameterize it, there are different answers.
Yeah.
I think the fundamental assumption here is that everyone's destination is the same, and everyone searches in the same way for an identical destination. Where I'm fairly sure that if we were to look at just the data right here at this table and suggestions Google might give us on what we're interested in based on our let's call them profiles.
Do you think Google is doing that?
They would be completely different.
Do you think Google is doing that? So
I'm absolutely sure Google is doing that.
So, for example,
they actually just rolled out an update specifically saying, "Look, we're using all of your history to target things specifically to what you're interested in based on what."
Right. So about where when you're looking at places to go, right? What about the way there?
Well, so it would depend, right? So okay, so fundamentally, Google's algorithms are minute by minute, right?
To an extent.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
If I were to search at 9 a.m. at rush hour, it would take me a different way than I was to search at 9 p.m., right?
Right.
For the same destination.
Right. But if anybody who searches in roughly the same neighborhood going downtown at roughly the same time will get roughly the same answer. Right?
Right. And so you're saying that's a net negative.
I'm not saying it's a negative. I'm just observing it's a change. And I'm asking if it's a good thing.
But was that different 20 years ago? Were people going, oh, okay, I'm going to take this, and how much deviation was that? There's always, you're talking about, these cores where people work and
You're wondering if it really was that different before.
I think it might have been. Because people used to think, instead of going through the main highway, somebody might be like, oh, I really like that rose garden. I just want to drive by it and take a look.
Or you wonder, but they had those mental models already. We haven't lost those mental models.
So, for example, when we choose a path on our own, we probably aren't mostly or completely optimizing for speed or time. We probably make a choice based on what we like, right? Do you think Google knows that? How to figure out how to get there, follow the routes that you prefer?
Yeah, but we know that. Yeah. We know that. I think we do know that.
We know what?
If I'm going to if I want to go and do something nice, wander around, I'm not going to use Google. But if I want to go to work in an efficient way, or I want to, my wife uses Waze all the time, and she actually discovers new routes all the time because it calculates real time where these bottlenecks are. So I think this generalization that we're being funneled is correct, but I think we have a bit more complex model of space and our trade-offs between whether we want to go there quick or if we're just going to explore.
Or maybe we just want to go the quiet, easy way as opposed to the fast, difficult way.
We do turn GPS off.
I think everybody's life experiences plays a lot of people in this room have endured or transcended this transition. Right? From the yellow pages, myself, to now having more information than you can know what to do with, right? But I think you were talking about the next generations. It's especially interesting of how different their cognitive processes and concepts of geography are going to change compared to many people in this room.
And I'm not arguing that by any means that this trend that I see towards a common filter applied to wayfinding is irreversible or bad or good, or that we couldn't specialize. In fact, I think that we could if we wanted to. you know, the notion that don't use Google if you want to go the fun way or the nice way, I think that's, you know, an assumption that is unnecessary. Google could know what you like. Google could know who you are and direct you in a way that you find pleasant.
That self-perpetuating thing is especially scary. If, for example, with the news, you know, it will just keep telling you what you want, and all of a sudden you become.
It's the Facebook effect in the real world, right? Like it's the echo chamber in the real world.
It could be like that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things the benefits that I see is that we could have a collective minimization of carbon by actually funneling people so that they don't have to stop as much, right?
Right. And Google is doing that to some extent already.
I think what you're trying to get at here comes back to personalization and recommendation. So if we were to restore the specialization, Google could use our implicit and explicit feedback to provide our preferences on certain things, and overall they could build a bigger model that would actually might be able to give us better routes and to make us happier.
So my impression of Google is like yours right now. Google's pathfinding algorithm or route finding algorithm is largely about efficiency, minimizing time of travel, largely. And I think you're right that if Google, if we let it and we wanted it to, if Google was watching us and how we drove all the time, it could build a model of our preferences and give us customized answers. Yeah.
So if you go to Google's Beijing site and you search for Falun Gong, and you go to Google's Hong Kong site and you search for the same thing, you'll find very different results.
Yeah, that's true. There are some regional differences.
And it doesn't matter what your profile is.
Now that one is probably imposed by the government. It is. Josh?
One of the thoughts about specialization that I have is that my routes are pretty dependent on what kind of parking sticker I have at this university. And so I don't doubt that Google will someday get to that point where they, you know, I put in a B sticker and it tells me what to do. But that's a level of specialization that's a little farther out.
Yeah, and anything that requires your active response is probably going to be limited at best. Google can collect lots of big data about you already. Like its phones know where you are all the time. So.
Right. It just occurs to me that there are these kind of things like you work at a university and you have a certain kind of sticker, and if you have, you know, a different kind of sticker, you're going to park somewhere very far away from me. And anyway, there's a lot of us at universities, and they're probably in analogous situations like that. It seems to me that we're not there yet in terms of the Google figuring all those details out.
We're getting there, though, I think. We're starting to get there. Right?
And more like a matter of resolution. So if I want to get to D.H. Hill, it puts me on the east side, even though I park on the west side.
Yep.
Yeah.
But how often do you actually, when you're in your home range, are you actually using Google to go find a parking space?
Well,
I think we're assuming that right now.
So you've got to I've got to add in there that, like, okay, this is telling me to get to this spot, it's going to be 15 minutes. So I'll add on like another minute or two because I know that my spot's not there.
Yeah, or just when you go to the grocery store down the street, or do you fire up Google? You know, I would argue that these questions are more about new locations and new places that you haven't been to before.
Yeah, there are several problems that Google solves for us, right? I've been focused on the routes, but it also influences the places I go, right? And I think you're right that Google knows stuff about us, and it probably shows us different answers when we search for destinations. Okay?
I also realized where Google kind of fails. Maybe it doesn't apply so much to the US because you don't use the public transport, but something that totally revolutionized our lives was the app to search for connections on the public transport. And if I do it on Google, it doesn't give me this capabilities of, for example, I need to use only the handicapped accessible buses and everything. So what I found myself doing both like back at home or even during vacation in Europe, that I was using this app much more frequently than the Google Maps. So this is also something that changed people's lives entirely. Because I wouldn't go these places if this wouldn't say me, oh, you would better take tram right now instead of a bus, because this is.
Yeah, Google is definitely making a major investment in solving that problem, but I could believe that at least locally it's behind other apps. So for example, the app everybody uses around state, Transload, is better at it than Google is here. Yes?
Another area this can inform is city planning and civil engineers and their regional planning. For example, I don't know if anybody's going to pay for the data, but they could model the full reopening of I-40, and then compare their model to the actual traffic flows when it opens.
Right.
And then tweak their models or tweak their inputs.
Yeah, one thing I've always wondered is, you know, implicitly we're giving away all of our location data to the big companies. We're not sure what they're doing with it, if anything. But it is still our data. We could also install some other app that just gives it away to the people we like, right? For free or for a fee.
Translate keeps it.
Yeah. And so, you know, if you wanted to contribute to the health of your city in some fashion, whatever that means, you could, you know, say, I donate all my spatial data to Raleigh. And then it would just always go there. And I think that would be, I mean, for that sort of reason, I mean, give away our data all the time to Google for convenience. You know, why not to other people? Yes?
I think there's also an assumption that you believe Google's right.
Yeah.
I mean, Google's not out there collecting data on every single road. They're getting that data from somewhere else. And my challenge would be, or my question to everybody is, where do you think that data's coming from? It's not always right. And when you get down to those local areas, such as a parking permit, but not even just that, but even some of the areas that everybody likes to visit, say a national park or a state park, a lot of times those data are not in Google. And there's the assumption that because it's on
this
Google machine here,
yeah,
and there has to be the understanding. So how do you restore that specialization? You have to understand that those models are based generally on time, and they use a lot of dynamic segmentation to break that up, which in itself has error associated with it. A simple issue is with Uber, Eddie, thanks. Somebody in my neighborhood got home and noticed someone was in their house because the Uber guy said, there's the house you want me to take you to, when it was a house across the street because it was under construction and the construction worker walked in the wrong house. So he assumed that this thing was right without using the mind to figure out where to go. And I think that's part of the problem that technology introduces into society.
Isn't that a fundamental issue with traditional, let's call it traditional media, paper media as well, right? I bought a map and it's 2 years old. It's not right anymore because there was construction.
Right.
Right. The addresses aren't lined up the way that I thought.
But addresses aren't on a paper map,
well,
for the most part.
Address blocks are, right? If I were going to the 200 block of Smith Street, right, I would expect that to be there. But if that hadn't been constructed yet, I wouldn't find it on a paper map.
But you know that it's paper map, so it's not automatically updated.
At least you have an expiration date on that.
Yeah. Everybody expects this to be right, or the majority of people expect this to be right.
Do they, though? Yeah, do they? I don't know.
I don't know. They're beginning to. I mean, your personal experience is usually yes, it's right.
I think it depends on that gradient of life experience.
So I'll talk about one more trend briefly, and that goes to what you were speaking to, which is, I think in general, finding our way around has become something that we are not very actively engaged in as we used to be. And that's a trend that is, you know, we used to be very actively engaged. We used to have to work hard at it. Today, you know, the Google person, whoever it is, tells us exactly what to do, step by step by step. And we don't really have to attend very much to what's around us. We can just sort of automatically, like we're going home or something, follow the directions. And so that's a pretty passive experience. And as you were mentioning, ultimately, Google is working on self-driving cars. So then you won't even have to turn a steering wheel anymore. You'll just get in the car, and you'll be transported there. So that's a kind of alarming trend, or a pretty drastic trend. And to get to your point, there's a really great book I encourage you all to read called Blue Highways. It's written maybe 20 years ago by a man who was between careers and decided that he would drive across, or at least around the country, following the blue highways as opposed to the red ones on the map, so all the byways. And to your point, I think that one side effect of this kind of passivity is that, like you were saying, we're often following these blue highways, using routes we'd never have chosen ourselves, because that's what Google thinks is most efficient, right? Because it's a little bit shorter, a little bit faster. So suddenly these very sleepy, little towns have like BMWs coursing through them because they happen to be on the short path between two common endpoints, right? And people don't realize what's going on until all of a sudden they're turning left, right. Yep. Yep. So, what do you think the implications of all of this are? The fact that we're beginning to pay less attention to finding our way around and not having to work as hard at it.
I'm really excited about self-driving cars.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like you were saying, it really gets us, from A to B very quickly with less work, and it saves us time. That's true, right?
I mean,
It gives us time for other things.
would be better,
But like others were saying, maybe we're beginning to lose the skill of finding our way around, right? And when the battery is dead, or the signal is gone, or we drop our phone, then what? Right?
Is that not like saying, oh, you've lost your horsemanship skills? Yeah. Like, it's not necessary, It's just not necessary anymore, right? It's just like, oh, well, when your car runs out of gas and breaks down on the side of the road, you'll wish you knew how to canter. But it's okay. It's not really a big deal anymore.
Yeah, it's not as big a deal, I think. Yeah, I don't think it's going to lead to disaster.
I think one of the gains that pushes back in the other direction against this homogenization is that this frees us up to have more diversity in the places that we go, right? Like, I was very much a creature of habit, I knew how to get to this place, I knew how to get to that place, and those are the places I would go. But then, now that I don't have to worry about how do I get to these places and how do I get home, well, I'm free to try these other places. I can go to this other place. And when you combine like the routing with the sort of place recommendations and stuff like that, it's like, oh, I had no idea there were 9 other pizza restaurants I could go to.
Right.
So I can try these other things. So while the way we move through the space might be increasingly homogenized or filtered onto certain places, we're going more places.
It's easier to get there than it ever was. That's true.
And we're getting very good at exploring alternatives that our ancestors and our fathers are not that much efficient doing. Exploring all different varieties of things. I mean, we are trained to do that. And I think the future generation will be much more efficient. Like, I'm quite sure, of course, your point may really make sense for me if I'm somewhere in outdoors and I don't have my cell phone, definitely, or in stranger country.
Yeah, then it's really catastrophic.
Or if I can access and explore alternatives, I would be much better and more efficient than my previous generation. And that's the same for future generations. So I think that's also a gain, which basically helps.
That's true. I think it's easier to find, to go to many diverse destinations. That's a good point. Yes?
I'd just like to comment that I moved to Raleigh 5 years ago from a small town of 100 people in the middle of a desert that had exactly 2 paved roads. One was a highway and one led up from the highway to the national park. The closest grocery store was in the next town over, which was 67 miles away. And I think that this whole conversation is fascinating to me, and I think it's somewhat like an urban problem, because there are plenty of places in our country, but in the broader world as a whole, where there is no cell phone reception. And where I was living, they didn't have a cell phone tower until I think like 2 years ago. And so I think that, there's always trade-offs with these kind of advances. So you gain some skills, you lose other skills. But I think one thing that maybe concerns me a little bit, just listening to this conversation, is that it has the potential to kind of like increase the urban-rural divide. You know, like, so if I'm a visitor to Raleigh and everybody's whizzing around, like relying on all these devices and somewhat their local knowledge, but also Google, that can fall short if you're just learning your way around someplace. By the same token, somebody from Raleigh visiting where I used to live is going to have a hard time as well. And so I think the convergence that you talked about is very real, and that maybe we're losing some things without even realizing it until we kind of get that either catastrophic, like rude awakening, or go outside of our home range where we
I think you're right. In general, if you're in the city, it's not going to be that catastrophic. If your phone dies, you know, you probably can still manage to get home. At least I can. But if you're in the middle of some rural countryside and it's nighttime, and you're cutting through some backwoods town because that's what Google said, and then your battery dies or you lose a signal, that could be. I mean, it's probably not very life-threatening, but it could be very inconvenient.
Right.
Yeah.
Related to that, it seems like with the apps, you don't get a good overview, really. You're usually just like, I'm going to turn left in a mile or something. So you're really kind of localized with an old-fashioned map. You could at least, you know, if you lost your way, you knew you had to keep going northwest or...
Yeah, one other trend that I won't have time to dive into at all is that I see is that, by and large, these digital interfaces are exocentric interfaces. So you're looking at a map from some sort of projection onto a plane. You're not embedded in a first-person view in that scene. I mean, there's some exceptions like Street View, but it's not very well integrated. Whereas, as we found more traditionally, as we found our way, we would mention landmarks and describe when to turn by mentioning this landmark. And we would be able to, see certain things at a certain scale that we're not really going to attend to anymore like we used to. And so even in terms of, and by the way, many populations, and interestingly, many populations are better served with a sort of more route-oriented, landmark-oriented set of instructions about how to get from A to B. And interestingly, urban people rely on landmarks more often than rural people. So it's interesting that by and large, landmarks and waypoints in a first-person perspective are largely absent from the instructions that we're getting right now. It just says, turn at this street, turn left in a quarter mile, get ready, turn right, right? And it doesn't tell you by the BI-LO, by the old Pizza Hut, right? And that's how many of us would naturally tell people and give directions and receive them. Yes?
And in the modern suburban environment, the landmark business is, turn right at the Starbucks. Like turn right at the Harris Theater. There's like, how many of those in?
That's a good point.
I'm raising children in North Raleigh. I do not know where they are.
Because everything's the same. Yeah.
I'm from that's not where you're from.
Well, basically, what you're saying is there are no landmarks in suburbia.
A rural place where there are mountains, there are streams, there are landmarks.
Yes.
It hasn't been too many years that where people have blindly followed the GPS, and the GPS said turn right here, and they've like driven off a cliff or into traffic. People have been navigated by a GPS into the outback of Australia and got like hours away and ran out of gas and died in the desert, following what the robot told them to do.
Well, let me wrap up by saying, by generalizing. If I think about all the ways that how we find our way around are changing, I would try to sum it up by saying that up until this point, by and large, it's been about function. And in many ways, we've solved the problem. People aren't getting lost very often, right? We're getting there. We're getting new places we didn't used to get to. So in the future, I think what it's going to be more about is things that we've been discussing, things like pleasure. Do I like this way of going? Did I like that destination? Or connectedness. Am I finding new places? Am I discovering new things? Am I able to meet the people I would like to meet? Am I learning about society? And also specialization or customization. You know, am I getting a problem that's meant for me and not sort of mass-produced for everybody? And so that's how I think wayfinding technology will be trending in general in the future. And the solutions that succeed will be good at that, and not just good at getting you there. Okay. So thanks for your attention and all your discussion and opinion.